13. Gryph's mind warped as he sluiced through an aperture into another universe. He felt a heart that was not his own pounding. The real Alaron had seen him. The being who attacked him was not some computer-generated welcoming committee, but a powerful avatar filled with malevolent intent. It had to be the Godhead. Lex had freaked when he heard the name. The fear that showed in his amiable and immature NPC's eyes had been downright terrifying. That look, bereft of any humor or jest, was the most unnerving sight of Gryph's new life. Even Finn Caldwell, who had seen many a horrible deed in his life, rarely experienced such terror. Gryph was trapped. He feared he would be in this weightless, bodiless state forever. Then, he hit a stone floor with enough force to crack ribs, expel air, and bruise muscles. For a few seconds, Gryph couldn't breathe, and his entire world was pain. Gryph's lungs burned. To say the wind had been knocked out of him was like saying decapitation was a mild inconvenience. He believed he'd never draw breath again. A few moments passed before he pulled in a short burst of air full of pain, relief, and an awful stench. "Ouch," Gryph said through gritted teeth. Gryph's health bar flashed in alarm, and he discovered that he had lost another 50% in the fall. "What the hell was that?" he grumbled, and the pain of broken ribs took his breath away. He moved to grab a health potion, but discovered that he couldn't move. Debuff added. Short-term paralysis. Cooldown 2 minutes. Gryph stared as the debuff clock counted down in the corner of his vision. He tried to turn his head to find Lex. "Lex," Gryph said in a strangled voice. "Hey, Lex, over here." There was no response, and Gryph wondered if his NPC was dead, smashed on impact. Perhaps that wasn't a bad thing, Gryph thought, and immediately felt guilty. Lex might be the most irritating banner of all time, but he had always been loyal. Maybe his personality would improve now that he was a flesh-and-blood person and a wandering preacher to boot. Face down in grit and muck, Gryph realized he was in a cave. A dark, dingy, and stinking cave. In the corner of his vision, his prompt icon blinked. With nothing else to do until the debuffs disappeared, he checked his prompts. "Welcome to the Realms. You have arrived at the starter village of Error. You will have a few hours to acclimate to your surroundings, become familiar with your new skills, and purchase any additional equipment you may need before joining the Great Quest. Congratulations, player. Endless adventure awaits you." "What the hell?" Gryph grumbled at the blazing red error message. "I'm not where I'm supposed to be." Gryph struggled to move, willing his damaged body to ignore the debuffs. Nothing. Then he heard a scratching, a scritching of not-so-tiny claws digging into the rock of the cave floor. It was coming from behind him. Gryph attempted to turn, but his traitor body refused to obey his commands. The barest tingle in the fingers of his right hand, like the painful pins and needles rush one gets after sleeping on an arm all night, hinted that feeling was slowly returning. "Shit," Gryph said aloud, and the scritching stopped. Had he scared the scritcher with his outburst? Or was it examining him, waiting and wondering? Was he prey? The scratching got closer, and Gryph did the only thing he could think of. He made lots of noise. Grunts and howls and expletives of anger poured from Gryph's parched lips, and he realized just how thirsty he was. The burning pain of returning sensation moved up his arm, and he made the clumsiest of movements towards the knife at his belt. He'd forgotten it until feeling returned and the pommel dug into his side. Something the size and weight of a mid-sized dog stepped up onto his booted foot, and a low growl rumbled through the cave. With tentative steps, it crawled up Gryph's back, getting closer and closer to his face. And still he couldn't move. The burning sensation of returning blood tore at Gryph's shoulder, and he was just able to grasp the hilt of the blade with trembling fingers. The hiss of steel greeted Gryph's ears as he eased the dagger from its sheath. No sound was ever so welcome. A cool breath exhaled onto his face. The stale stench he'd noticed earlier grew to a horrid carrion smell. Gryph knew that it was coming from whatever now lurked on his back. It was a carnivore, ready to take a bite out of him. A long snout came into sharp focus. Beady eyes that glowed with a dim green light sat atop the muzzle. Gryph made eye contact, and the foul creature opened its mouth to expose row after row of needle-sharp teeth. A low, evil hiss flowed from the creature's mouth. Gryph stared at the creature. Information rushed into his mind. A new prompt popped up unbidden in Gryph's vision. Undead Barrow Rat, Level 2, H35, S20, M0, SP0. Barrow rats are larger, more disgusting cousins to normal rats, and while they prefer carrion, they have been known to take bites out of easy prey when the opportunity presents itself. This barrow rat was reanimated after death. Cowardly and easily spooked, barrow rats' real danger comes from the disease barrow rot that fills their foul mouths. Strengths unknown. Immunities unknown. Weakness unknown. You have learned the skill Analyze, Level 1, Tier, Base, Skill Type, Passive. You have shown an ability to identify creatures you encounter. You can now identify basic creatures, Levels 1 to 5. You can now access the Skill Perk tree that will allow you to know their strengths and weaknesses. Each level will unlock the ability to identify creatures of an additional 5 levels. The barrow rat climbed onto Gryph's shoulder and sniffed at his face. Gryph knew the debuff clock would last longer than this stinking beast's fear. It would take a bite out of him. He would get barrow rot, which sounded horrid. So he did the only thing he could. Gryph bellowed at the top of his lungs, tearing at his parched throat. The rat jumped back in fright before hissing in anger and perhaps embarrassment. It took just a few seconds for the creature to regain its courage and climb back onto Gryph's shoulder, ready to take a bite out of him. Debuffs cleared. Gryph thrust the dagger up with all his might and impaled the rat through the mouth. The point erupted from the back of the stinking creature's head, destroying its small brain before the signals of pain reached it. The creature died in a spasm of blood and gore. You have scored a critical hit, 5 times normal damage. You have received 175 experience points, XP, for killing Undead Barrow Rat. Well, that sucked, Gryph said, getting to his feet. He was in a small cave. He looked around, but he could see no way out. How'd you get in here? He said to the dead rat, nudging it with his toe. Lex, You around, buddy?" As expected, he got no answer. The room was dimly lit by a luminescent fungus clinging to the walls and fed by a slow trickle of water that came from a small crevice near the ceiling. Was that how the rat got in? The sight of water reminded him how thirsty he was. He girded himself and then slurped at the trickle, half expecting to get some horrid disease. It took nearly 10 minutes, but soon he drank his fill. Gryph brought up his internal map, hoping to discover where he was. The world was a black mass of nothingness, aside from the small cave he occupied. The tag on the map read, "The Barrow, Level 3. "Well, that's no help," Gryph grumbled, wincing at the pain from his broken ribs. He eased himself into a sitting position, forcing the fear and claustrophobia into the deep recesses of his mind. It wasn't gone, it was just submerged. So far, his experience with the realms had not been pleasant. Yet people enter this place by choice. Gryph knew he wasn't where he was supposed to be. Aileron must have altered the system in some way. He was alone, God only knew where, and no closer to saving Bryn. Maybe he should log off and reboot? The realms may be real, but the game used to get players into the realms was, at its heart, still a computer program. And what did you do when your computer went wonky? You rebooted it. Gryph brought up his interface again and tapped at the log off button. He felt it depress and prepared to return to the real world. Nothing happened. Not even another error message. He hit it again. Nothing. Never one to resort to bitching, Gryph assessed his situation. His health was still low, and he was in pain. He pulled a health potion from his inventory. He examined the vial of swirling red liquid for a few moments before shrugging and downing it in one gulp. Instantly, heat flowed through his body and his pains soothed away. First, the minor scratches and bruises disappeared. The pounding in his head, he suspected was a concussion, lessened and eased. He felt his ribs snap back into place and the bones knit together again. "Holy crap," Gryph said, his mood perking up. The U.S. Army would kill for this technology. Gryph stood and did a few jumping jacks to force feeling back into his arms and legs. After stretching, he noticed the small wooden chest hidden in a nook. It hadn't been there a few moments ago. Gryph was sure of it. Where had it come from? Gryph walked up to the chest with caution. It couldn't have just magically appeared, could it? Was the concussion worse than he thought? Maybe he was hallucinating. He'd hit his head pretty hard when he fell. With that thought, Gryph looked up at the roof of the cavern a mere dozen feet above him where stalactites jabbed down like fangs. He felt like he was inside the maw of a massive stone beast. He expected to see a hole in the roof, something he had fallen through, something that would explain all of this. But the ceiling was solid. None of this makes any sense. Gryph walked up to the small chest, made of simple planks of wood, bound by tarnished bands of iron. A rusty latch bore a keyhole, but the latch itself was bent, suggesting that the lock had long ago failed its purpose. Gryph's hand hesitated above the lid. A faint red glow pulsed around the keyhole. His hand stopped, and he focused his attention on the glow. It intensified, and he knew he was looking at a trap. Trap detected. Use the disarm skill to avoid pain and death. "Oh, that's helpful," Gryph grumbled. He grabbed his locksmith kit. Opening the small box, he saw various tools designed for intricate detail work. His mind flashed back to Ranger School, where he'd learned how to disarm a claymore mine, and gave thanks to the U.S. Army. He suspected it would not be the last time he'd be thankful that the realms imported real-world skills. Gryph inhaled, calming his hand and his mind, and slipped the thin pick into the lock. After careful probing, he felt a click, and the red glow disappeared. He replaced the tools and eased the chest open. Inside was a small bag of coins, a small shield, a dagger in a sheath, a bandolier bearing 6 throwing knives, and a small silver ring with a row of sapphires. You have found 3 gold coins, 12 silver coins, and 22 bronze coins. You have found a banded wooden buckler block. Item class, non-magical. Base AC, 6. This small shield attaches to the forearm and is a great complement to staves and spears. You have found a fine steel dagger, short blade. Item class, non-magical. Base damage, 6. This finely honed dagger is sharper than a normal steel dagger. You have found throwing knives of minor bleeding, thrown weapon. Item class, non-magical. Base damage, 4. 25% chance to cause bleeding damage, 5 points per second for 5 seconds. These throwing knives have serrated edges that may cause additional bleeding damage. You have found Ring of Minor Air Shield. Item class, base. Item category, active. Active powers. Power, 1. Creates a sphere of solidified air that will protect the user from damage. The air shield can absorb 5 points of damage for each point of mana spent. It will last for 5 seconds per point of mana spent. The air shield will collapse once damage limit is reached or time expires. Power, 2. Each level of air magic mastery reduces cooldown by 5 seconds. Power, 3. Each tier of air magic mastery ups total daily usage by 1. Mana limit, 10%. Cooldown, 5 minutes. Max uses 3 times per day. Your skill, Identify, has been upgraded due to the presence of a prime Godhead. It is now a gift and has an effective level of 100. You are now able to identify any and all non-magical and magical items, and you will know their powers and capabilities. Note: this ability will not identify all powers and properties of a prime Godhead. These powers and properties will have to be discovered over time. Not a bad haul, Gryph said as he pulled the bandolier on and slipped the ring onto his finger. Part of him wondered why he'd received such a bounty for slaying so simple a foe. Maybe due to the paralysis. He realized his excitement was rather foolish. What good would any of this stuff do him if he was stuck in this damn cavern? The stirrings of panic and despair built up in him when another dim glow appeared inside the chest. A small blue square glowed at the top left corner where the walls of the chest joined. He eased his hand in and pressed down on the blue glow. He heard a small click, and then the rumble of rock scraping on rock. Behind him, the cave wall rose into the ceiling, revealing a dark passageway.